Thanks for being here. It's great. We have a great panel. Just to intro, we have, I'm sure you all know, Suzi Sosa, who's essentially the queen of social entrepreneurship here in Austin, Texas. There we go. Yes, I did. Zane Wilemon, who's proving you don't have to live in LA to be LA.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Steve.
Tom Sears, who has abandoned us for greener pastures in San Francisco.
But he's still wearing his boots.
But he's still wearing his boots, and as he said earlier, Austin is home and always will be home. And then Courtney Spence, who is a phenomenal person doing really innovative things, and it's going to be great to hear her take on social innovation. You know, we are in danger of potentially losing Courtney to San Francisco as well. You know, I think this is an important panel to make sure that doesn't happen. So in short, what I wanted just to do to intro, many people don't know Whole Planet Foundation, but I think it is an important example, a tangible manifestation of what we're talking about today of social enterprise from really a leader in making Austin what it is today, which is Whole Foods Market. You know, 30 years ago, Whole Foods started as Cheapo Records and was one of the leaders in the organic natural food movement. We here believe that Austin can also be a global leader in social innovation. You know, we've talked about Kenya here a lot today, Nairobi, and you know, we all know San Francisco, the things that they're doing, and New York as well. So what can we do here to make sure that the voice of the social entrepreneur, the innovative nonprofit, has space and support? So, you know, Whole Planet, we support microfinance around the world. Really, the first initiative 30 years ago, nearly 40 years ago now, with Muhammad Yunus winning the Nobel Peace Prize in 2006. So you have nearly 30 years before it's really recognized as a tool to solve these social issues, using business as that greatest agent of change. So here, my personal belief is we need people, programs, and places that support the change maker, and we do some of that through things like this, but we need to make sure there's places so that every single day the budding startup has a place to go for support. You know, we do that with the tech industry. We need to do that with social enterprise as well. So I will turn it over to the group now, and we can start with La Reina. Here you go.
Well, is there a question that we're answering?
You tell. The question we decided we would ask and have the panel as well as introduce themselves. What do they believe we need here in Austin to become a capital of social innovation in the world? You know, I know oftentimes we love the hike and bike trail so much that we forget that there's millions of trails out there around the world that enrich our lives and can help enrich our city too.
Well, thanks, Steve. Thanks for organizing this panel, and I'm grateful to all of you that are interested in this topic. I think this is something that is well within our reach, and if we set the intention, which you're being very forward about doing, then we have a much better chance of it happening. You know, I'll just start for a second on actually how I came to the social entrepreneurship space in Austin, because I think this is an important pathway for a lot of people, is that I went to school, you know, really focused on social change, on public policy, and actually moved to Austin to work for the federal government in the U.S. Department of Commerce. But a few months later, I met, you know, my now husband, Roy Sosa, who was a dot-com entrepreneur. And he had just started NetSpend. It was a couple years old. And I was completely mesmerized by the energy and the environment of his startup, right? An incredible amount of innovation, you know, customers and employees and excitement and things scaling really quickly. So, you know, they hit, you know, 1 million customers and cash flow positive and, you know, received significant investment, which was like complete opposite. This is in you know, early 2002, so post September 11th, to the environment in the government where you really felt like nothing was happening. And so that was when I set about my intention to see how we could fuse the best of the entrepreneurship and startup world with this desire to do social good. And Austin is an incredible place for that, because my story can happen again and again and again because of these two ingredients that we have in abundance, which are creative people with the intention to create social change, and a very vibrant entrepreneurial community that can bring that know-how on how you start something up, how you create an innovation, and how you make it happen. The piece that I'll sort of stop with, and if anyone wants to talk about it more, I think it relates to some of your work, where we're really lacking in Austin is on the capital side. So in terms of social enterprises being able to scale, we have this incredibly fertile ground, as I said, with if you have social interest and entrepreneurial skills, but then when it comes to trying to find the capital to be able to get those ideas off the ground and scale them in any way, Austin really doesn't have anything.
Cool. I'll jump in and share just about CTC. I'm an old guy in this line of work. I find that most of the people are in their 20s. And I actually started CTC about 13 years ago, bought a one-way ticket to Kenya and ended up living in Kenya for a little over a year. And CTC, I say we kind of started ass backwards in this social innovation space because we started with relationships and just started being with the people, living in the community, listening to the stories. And during that time when I came back to the States, Austin is home, started seeing this space being created, which is a social innovation space. And this word going around, social entrepreneur, and that was nothing that I considered myself being, or that it was a new phrase. And I started seeing at the same time our funds dwindling in our programs, and what we do is we empower communities in Kenya to lift themselves out of poverty. And one of the things that we had started was a school for children with special needs fairly early on in the organization's birth, and it was the only school in the Rift Valley, only school of its kind, and we were like, we got to figure out some way to sustain this school. We got to figure out some way to take care of these kids. At the same time, their mothers were coming to us and were saying, we need something to do with our time. We don't have to take care of our kids every day. You guys are doing such a great job at the school. And I was like, well, man, maybe we can teach these moms how to do something, and we could at the same time help these kids, and at the same time this whole innovative space was being created. And so we plunged in. Steve laughs at me because I showed up at Whole Foods, just knocked on their door, was like, bags, we're gonna sell you guys bags. And he's like, dude, no, you're not gonna sell us bags. But long story short, what I have seen, what we have accomplished in this space is we've gone from a school with children with special needs, just a handful of us, to we're now the largest employer in a community of 60,000 people. We employ over 600 individuals. Most of those individuals are working in business and putting that money back into their communities in Kenya. And they're Kenyans creating Kenyan solutions to Kenyan problems. How that translates to Austin, I just love Austin and I love Texas, and it just so happens that our approach of being relationship-based fits very well with Austin. Suzi and I were just talking about authenticity, and that at the end of the day, it all boils down to relationships, whether it's relationships with the donors, with the foundation, or specifically with the people that you're serving on the ground in places like Kenya. And that's what I think Austin is already contributing to the innovative space, is being relationship-based, and where the resources meets the need, and they're doing that very well. And just like the social innovative space, it's new. And Austin is new, and I think things like Innovation Plus, I think things like Whole Planet Foundation, Students of the World, you're seeing these organizations, the CTCs, you're seeing us pop up and meeting that need. And I think if there's anything that Austin is lacking, is definitely what Suzi said, is the access to that capital. We fortunately have worked out a great relationship with Whole Foods, but there's definitely a greater need for it.
All right, so I kind of get dogged on both sides of the fence here a little bit. In fact, I think it was maybe 6 months ago, I was sitting on a panel not a few blocks from here that says why I moved my company to Silicon Valley. So I get sort of hammered on both sides of the fence. But you know, I grew up in Austin. I've lived here pretty much my whole life, frankly. Elementary, middle school, high school, college, you name it. And you know, when I made the decision to go to Silicon Valley, a lot of it had to do a lot with what Suzi was saying, was access to capital, which is just fundamentally different in Silicon Valley. It's, you know, they still have sort of this, you know, 1800 sort of gold rush mentality where there's like billions and billions and billions of dollars, and they'll just throw money at anything just to see if there's gold, right? And I think that's just something that is totally different, especially when you're working on, you know, consumer-oriented products that are much different than sort of the more enterprise-oriented plays that they have here in Austin, Texas, and throughout most of Texas, whether it's energy or real estate or whatnot. And so, you know, in addition to sort of this, I'd like to tell people Silicon Valley's like the magical kingdom. It doesn't really exist anywhere else in the world, much like Disney World. But so it's like, you know, I sit back and I kind of get asked this like basic question. And luckily, I was able to convince this other Austinite to, you know, be my wife. And now I'm afraid Steve's mad at me for like stealing her from Austin. So I guess that's 3 times I'm getting dogged now. Like,
Hey, bro.
but you know, you know, I love Austin. It's where I grew up. It is my home. And so like my message is very authentic and loving, right, in that manner. But typically, my general response is like, why does Austin need to have a, you know, be Silicon Hills or whatever? Like, how can Austin just be Austin? Because that's the charm. And like, Austin is a magnificent, beautiful, wonderful city. It's a great place to grow up. It's a great place to build companies. It's a great place to fail. You know, if I failed in San Francisco, right, it's a long fall, right? And, you know, I can still get, you know, a place to live for a few $100 a month, whereas in San Francisco, like, that might be like a cardboard box, right? But, you know, that's my ultimate question is like, you know, how do you let sort of the natural charm, the natural authenticity of Austin break through, which attracts people? And then how do you align capital to drive, you know, that towards sort of visionary ideas, whether it's Students of the World or CTC, or even, you know, I studied, you know, the Sosas in college at UT, and my magnificent company, NetSpin, was amazing. But yeah, and then, you know, yeah, it's kind of what I think about it a little bit.
So I'm Courtney Spence. I founded an organization called Students of the World when I was an undergrad at Duke, and the whole premise of what we do is trying to mobilize and unite and empower the next generation of the creative class, college students, photographers, designers, coders, filmmakers, to use their creativity for good. And while I started this in college, I decided once I graduated that this would be my full-time gig. I was 22, 23, moved to New York City because obviously that's where you go to start a nonprofit. A year later, and absolutely no money, I come back to Austin, which is where I'm born and raised, and have also now spent a majority of my life. And I came back to, you know, move back in with my parents for a couple months to figure it out. And I remember being here, and it's almost like coming home and seeing it for the first time. I was like, this is the perfect community. It is creative, it is young, it is supportive. Like Tom said, I think it's a great place to be able to fail. It's important to, as a startup, to feel not that you want to fail, but you have to be comfortable in failing, because that's what a startup does. It's reiterating itself and you know, fixing problems that it's had in its early years so that it can scale and grow in its later years. So for 8-9 years, Students of the World has been based here in Austin, and it has been about relationships. It's been about Whole Foods and Whole Planet Foundation. It's been about, we had donated office space at GSD&M. You have this opportunity to really mix you know, very smart people from different sectors with different backgrounds and areas of expertise to really help bolster your ideas and your startup. So I think Austin, in terms of social innovation, is the place to be a startup. It is the place to incubate an idea. I think where we fall short as a community, and this has been said all along, is in that scaling phase and that growth phase, when you need access to capital, when you need a larger network to interact with in terms of, asking for donations or asking for investment or asking for mentorship. I think that when you're scaling out of Austin, and I've noticed this the last year as my company has been scaling, it's taken me being on the road all the time. And it takes me to San Francisco, LA, New York, DC. And I do that rotation over and over and over again. And I think that's where we, as a city and a community, really need to think about how do we support those entrepreneurs, those companies between the numbers of 5 and 15 as they're scaling and really trying to make an impact nationally. How do we support them here? I think more direct flights to the larger cities would be nice, but that's not something that I have control over. So anyway, that's kind of been my experience here.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. When we think about, okay, what are the steps? Like, if we had to make specific recommendations, I think that Austin should set an ambition to create an impact fund. There's no reason, certainly with Austin Ventures and like UTIMCO, I mean, we have a nucleus of investors of different levels in the city, and if all of them committed some portion of funds to an impact fund that would invest in social enterprises, that would go a huge way in the distance to making Austin a real capital.
Just maybe extend another question. I think part of the people that do work globally, one of the things that we've always enjoyed is these conversations that you can really believe you can change the world. Oftentimes here in Austin, we don't have those conversations about what's going on in Kenya. I mean, there's an election just recently. How many of us are talking about that? So I think that is what is the compelling reason to not change Austin, but help Austin evolve into this global city. And let's evolve in a way that is about consciousness and expanding that consciousness. So, to you guys, what do you think we need to do in order to have more of those conversations, make people, help people have spaces to think about our global connectedness?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just jump in real quick. I think it's both the physical space. I think creating more physical spaces in Austin, which there are certainly here, but places where people can convene that deal with global issues, but that also don't just deal with global issues from a nonprofit perspective. Somewhat similar to what you were saying, having spent time with Tom and spending more time in San Francisco and being inundated with the tech world where I understood about 5 words out of every 5-minute conversation that I was listening to. But it really challenged me to think about my business in a different way, think about how do I go from running a small nonprofit to a really smart, sustainable social enterprise. What do I need to do that? How do I make smarter decisions? So I think it's not just about bringing together people that deal with the world globally, but it's also that deal with the world as tech companies, as nonprofits, as governments, as bringing together people from different sectors that really help challenge the way that we see our own companies and help us scale. So I think physical spaces, whether it's a rotating art gallery that focuses on issues of global issues, that hosts events and salons, and is it salons or saloons? I don't.
Saloons in Texas.
Both. That's right. All right, saloons. Yeah. Anyway, but I would like to see more physical spaces in Austin, I think.
I'll jump in. I mean, I think to your question, I think capital is one issue, and definitely. One thing that's great about Austin is when you're in Austin, people love Austin. I mean, when you're here for South by, people freak out about Austin. That's also just a natural hurdle we're going to face. But I think Austin's evolving, and I think having more global-oriented conversations will start to happen. And, because, like Amplify Austin, where I live here, I give here, it's all about promoting Austin. If I go to New York or San Francisco, you don't get that kind of a sense of it being so much about the city. I come back, I'm alive with the kind of conversations that I've had when I go to those cities. So I think it's leaders convening, opportunities like this being hosted to where we can kind of start to push and pave the way to make that happen.
Yeah, I hope that some of this will be generational, because now more than 50% of kids below a certain age are Hispanic now. And, I think one of the points that is often made to us at the Dell Social Innovation Challenge is, why are all your winners always about India and Africa? And what about the US? And also, what about Latin America, Central America and Latin America? And Austin is perfectly positioned to become, you know, a global hub for Central, you know, Mexico, Central America, and Latin American social entrepreneurship. And I know that there's a lot of sexiness around Africa, and in India, social entrepreneurship is really taking off, but that could be a market opportunity for us where, you know, no one has really taken that position. A second point to your question around like how do we build greater community is, you know, we've had a little bit of like parallel conversations going on in Austin. So, you know, conscious capitalism is based here. You know, John Mackey's one of the leaders. His book just came out. And, you know, in his book, he's very, you know, he comes out strong and says why this is not social entrepreneurship. And so I love to challenge him on that. I say, really, we're all trying to do the same thing. These are purpose-driven enterprises that are financially sustainable and accountable to stakeholders. What's so wrong about being part of the social entrepreneurship movement? And, you know, he will say, well, I don't want to be out on the fringe. I want to be on the mainstream. Well, we want to be in the mainstream too. So figuring out how conscious capitalism layers in with social entrepreneurship, which is a group, and then we have through Innovation Plus, which is a sort of impact philanthropy group that Steve and I are both on the board of. That's a whole nother niche, right? Which is sort of the nonprofit impact philanthropy. And to the extent that we can start to weave together these parallel conversations and get some critical mass, and maybe agree that, okay, we're each going to be sort of a niche under a bigger umbrella, whatever we want to call that umbrella. I think now there's a kind of a point in time where we may be able to get more scale in the conversation than we've ever been able to have before.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I remember about Austin is, you know, I remember the first time I went to Silicon Valley. I think that's probably the most relevant. And, you know, I was like, I got to go see. Everyone's like Silicon Hills, and totally I was like 100% in that game, right? And then I was like, but I really need to go see what this Silicon Valley thing is all about. So I went out there for about 2 weeks. And I think probably the most significant thing I noticed is the number of people that think big, right? I mean, everybody on the street that you meet is thinking about how they can completely disrupt and overhaul the entire world, right? Everyone is thinking that way. And not only that, but there's a gargantuan pile of money that's there to support it. And I think that those two things are really important to have. And so, you know, I came back from that, and it's just like all of a sudden I realized I'm thinking way too small. I need to think bigger. And ultimately, I wanted to surround myself with people who thought that big all the time, where they weren't afraid of building a company that was going to completely overhaul. It wasn't about building a lifestyle. It was about fundamentally disrupting an entire planet, right? And I think that is something that ultimately, you know, I really care about. And in terms of, you know, there's like social entrepreneurship and there's conscious capitalism, and I think about the cause economy, right? And it's like you have all these different things. It's certainly the next decade of consumer experience, right? You know, we're now living in a state of time where people will actually buy, you know, a pair of glasses or a pair of shoes because it puts another pair of glasses or another pair of shoes on another individual. And that's total personality shift. But at the same time, it's the new identity, right? As we sort of walk around, we're expressing values about ourselves and who we are and what we ultimately care about. And, you know, you can even, you know, shift that to the Toyota Prius, which is another cause economy kind of product. And whether it's social entrepreneurship or conscious capitalism or whatever, you know, understanding that is the next decade of consumer experience, and then being able to ally people around it to deploy capital towards it, because it takes capital, right? And you have to be able to do that. And you can't just have, you know, a few people willing to take risks and take bets. You have to have an entire community do it.
So maybe just to wrap up the conversation, we've talked about a few different things. Do you have a recommendation on what we should do, what action we could take, or do we do nothing and let it happen organically?
I mean, I'll say I think we're doing it, and I think it's you have leadership that's happening here that hasn't been here, that's having these types of conversations. And I just think it's continuing to have those, and maybe to Tom's point, being a little bit more aggressive about those conversations. So.
I mean, I said some of them. I think we should set an intention to create an impact fund. With Innovation Plus, we're trying to do that on the nonprofit side, but we really need it on the for-profit social enterprise side. So, you know, maybe aggregating together some of the influencers who can do that. And then I think trying to create critical mass around the conversation. You know, we've challenged our board with Innovation Plus, that Innovation Plus might need to take a role as a kind of city leader in this conversation. And some of it is having the conversation at the city level. So to your point, Tom, going to city council and saying, this is an economic opportunity, right? This can help Austin, you know, have a more robust economy because this is the direction that we're all going in. And so, you know, make the business case why we need to invest in this, both for spaces, you know, what are the three things you said? Spaces,
People, places, and programs, maybe?
yeah. And so, you know, getting the capital, getting the spaces, and getting the support. So, we'd love ideas and any of you that want to be part of it, so let us know. Do we have time for Q&A? I don't know what happens next.
I think we might be in the red zone.
We're in the red zone.
Yeah. I don't know if that's in the red minus Q&A or what.
I have no idea.
We'll take some questions, yeah. I think we're the last panel anyway.
Behind us.
Sure.
Yeah.
Go for it. Carol? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really great. One of the things I was going to add into that is like we're really great at putting $500 million into a pipeline, right? How do we turn around and redirect? Because there's a ridiculous amount of capital in Texas. There really is, right?
I'm happy to be the fund manager.
Totally, right? Exactly.
After we, you know, get total world domination on the Dell Social Innovation Challenge,
Exactly.
then.
How do you redirect and redeploy some of that capital towards some of these different things? I think is really important.
You know, I mean, I'm just at the very beginning of that phase, but it's been a real, I think the last 6 months have been a real challenge in that, I think in terms of just team management and understanding how you take your company and your team that was working very closely on very like, you know, smaller projects into a larger space physically, you know, is one thing. I think there's some really great collaborative spaces here, but you know, sometimes when you're an organization like mine, not ready to fully get our own office space yet, but we're starting to get too big for, you know, the space that we're in. Where do we go? Center 61 is providing some great spaces that Steve's involved with, but there needs to be more of that. And I know he's got some plans for that too. But I also just think in terms of the mentorship that I've needed as a leader to lead my team through this transition and this growth phase is really significant. And I'm fortunate to have great mentors, but I could honestly use a couple more. So if anybody out there wants to help me out, I'd love to talk to you after. But so I think it's just there's just a transition, and I know there's lots of articles and books and things written on it. And I'm starting to read them myself.
So that's it for us. Thank you very much for coming out, and more chats later, right? Thanks.
Thank you.